Um, the first question that we wanted to kind of dive into was speaking of the uh, Old Testament and how prophecy kind of comes into play and how it touches base with the New Testament with Jesus coming. Um, Talk about the lineage of Jesus, because there was this prophecy, and then I know that when I read the New Testament and I see how it talks about the lineage, but then I see that Jesus isn't directly connected to the King of David because it's Joseph's lineage, and how do you reconcile that? And how does all that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that a little bit. Some of what's maybe important to start with is that the reason it was important that Jesus would be connected to the lineage of David, it's found in 2 Samuel as David is king, and he's praying and interacting with God. God makes a covenant with him, and one of the covenants he makes with David is that there would forever, David and his lineage would be ruler over God's people. And so the Old Testament people of God, after the kingdom split, there was the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Judah's the good guys in the rest of the Old Testament. They're the people actually in the lineage of David. The kingdom of Israel were people who decided they wanted the warrior to be their leader, and they went with a different commander of the army instead of Solomon's son. But forever then, and still to this day, Orthodox practicing Jews are waiting for the return of a king. And that king, one of their requirements would be that he's in the line of David. And so when Jesus comes and claims to be the Messiah and claims to be ruler of God's people and king over God's people, it's important that it would line up with God's covenant that he was in the lineage of David. And if you read through those lineages, there's one found in Matthew and there's one found in the book of Luke. So it's Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3 have those lineages. A lot of people start to have this question about particularly the link of Jesus back to David. Both of those lineages and genealogies go before David. So Matthew starts with Abraham and goes Abraham to David. Luke starts all the way back at Adam and goes Adam to David. And they kind of agree on all of those. All of the names in those sections, like in between Abraham and David, they give the exact same names. But then when you look at the lineage they give between David and Jesus, they're different. They disagree with each other. They have different numbers of people. So Matthew's genealogy has 42 people in it. Luke's genealogy has 77 people in it. Quite a few gaps in that. And then if you look through, both of them say they're tracing it up through Joseph's line, and yet between Joseph and David, they have about half of the same names and then a bunch of different names. And Luke has a lot more names. And so people come to this question like, if the Gospels can't agree on how we connect Jesus to David, or if they disagree, does that mean they're not reliable? Does that mean one of them was lying? Does that mean one of them was wrong? What do we do with the fact that they have largely different understandings of that? And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and why there's those differences, or what we do about those differences. I don't know why the differences are there. We can guess at that, but what people have done in response, why we think that it's okay that there's differences in those lineages and those understandings. And so a couple of things to understand from the big picture level first. At the big picture level, in the ancient world, they cared a lot less about precision than we do. Our world, with our scientific understanding of the world and the repeatable nature of proving things, and we want precision and accuracy in everything that happens. The ancient world it's not that they ignored that, but it was far less important to them than symbolism was and than ease of memory was. And so it's pretty commonly understood that when Matthew records 42 genealogy names listed, that it's because he wanted them grouped in easy to memorize sections of 14. So he has 14 names between Abraham and David. And then he has 14 names between David and when the people of God were exiled from the promised land. And then he has 14 names from the exile to Jesus. And that would be easy kind of major groups to memorize. And so we would think that that's more important than precision. And so Matthew just doesn't record all of the names. Some of that you can see when you look at Luke's. An example, if you wanted, I looked up one of them. It's in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. You can see Jehoram become king of Judah. And if you look in Matthew's genealogy, you can find Jehoram's name listed there. And then it says Uzziah comes after that. And yet if you look just in the next 4 chapters of Chronicles, you'll see there's 3 kings between Jehoram and Uzziah. There's 3 other names there that just Matthew doesn't list. And if you look at Luke's list, they're there. He lists Jehoram and he lists Uzziah and he lists 3 names in between them. Matthew ignores them. At the big picture level, we think it's because Matthew was trying to put these major blocks that were easy to remember and set apart parts of Israel's history pretty easily. When you look at why he would choose which names to keep and which names not to keep, the 3 names that he skips in between Jehoram and Uzziah were 3 really bad kings for Judah. And Judah didn't have a lot of the really bad ones. Judah was the side that had some of the good ones. But these were 3 that did really bad things. And so if Matthew was going to skip some, it makes sense that those would be some that he skipped. And so that's kind of an understanding of how Matthew came to his genealogy. Matthew was writing for the Jewish people, and he was writing in ways that they could kind of block and memorize and see the lineage of Jesus back to David. Luke wasn't writing for the Jews. Luke was writing, it says, to Theophilus, which may have been a person or may just mean the people that he's writing to. But he's writing kind of for the world to understand, not just the Jews to understand. And so he brings in more of the names, like I said, 77 names instead of 42. And about half of them are the same that are between David and Jesus, and about half of them are different. And here's where the debates start to come in. How do we get to so many different names? Not just missing names, but literally different names in Luke. And there's a couple of major arguments for that. One of those is that there would have been a major argument that Luke is recording the genealogy of Mary and not the genealogy of Joseph. He writes Joseph's name because we always would have recorded male names, and Luke particularly records more male names, where Matthew includes more of the females. That while he says Joseph, that he likely was tracking Jesus' biological lineage, whereas Matthew is tracking his legal lineage. And so that there's a difference there. That's probably the most prominent theory, but it's not the only one. One that other scholars believe, or other people study, is that there was this understanding in Scripture that, or in the ancient world, that if you were married and the husband died, that his brother would become the husband of that wife. So I'm married. If I died, my brother would marry my wife, would become father to my daughter, and that would be a normal thing. And that legally in that world, my brother would then be remembered as my daughter's father, even though he was never my daughter's father. He didn't birth her or raise her. If that happened, that the genealogy record would record my brother as my daughter's father. And that some of the lineages that Luke has that are really different from what Matthew has would be this understanding that this may have happened a couple of times. And that again, that Matthew may have recorded legal genealogies where Luke was recording biological genealogies, and those lists would differ based on the way the ancient world would have covered who was actually the father versus who was known as the father, even if they weren't scientifically or biologically the father. And if you Google it, you can find some different genealogy trees where they pare a couple of those names down, where it goes from being similar names that are listed to different names, and how they got to that with who could have been brother to who, and who would have had to die, and if that happened, that the genealogies could work out that way. So the major differences in those genealogies and how we kind of reconcile that they're different are either that one of them is tracing the lineage through Mary instead of through Joseph, and that one of them may just be tracing a legal genealogy that includes what we call this kinsman redeemer thing, where a brother marries his brother's wife if he's died. I'm going to say one other thing about genealogies before Ryan moves us on, just because I think it's fascinating. I had said that Matthew, speaking to the Jews, starts his genealogy with Abraham. And he does that because they understand Abraham as the father of the Jews, and the promise that the first covenant God makes is with Abraham. And then Luke, writing to the non-Jews, traces his lineage all the way back to the start of creation, to Adam, because he's writing to the whole world, and he wants the whole world to see the importance of Jesus. And so he goes not just back to the origination of the Jews, but all the way back to the origination of the world. Luke, the Gospel of John doesn't record a genealogy in the same way, but it starts, if you know it, by tracing Jesus all the way back to the beginning of time. He starts with this understanding, as he's going to talk about Jesus. It's not I want to present him to the Jews or I want to present him to the world who knows something about spiritual things. John says, no, I'm going to start assuming everybody knows nothing, and I'm going to take Jesus all the way back to before creation, all the way back into the heavens with God, where he starts with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. He traces Jesus not even back to creation, but before that. So 3 of the 4 Gospels that record Jesus' lineage all trace them back to different points and for different reasons. Just a fun bit of trivia for you.
So then, to wrap it up in a bow, so
Yeah.
how do we say that he is fulfilling the prophecy, because regardless of how they're recording those
Yep.
lineages, we're saying that it's either, the understanding is that they're either tracing it through Mary, which is the direct biological, or like you said, more like the legal, which
Yep.
could be through Joseph. But the understanding is that one way or the other,
Right.
Jesus said,
Yep, both of them get back to being through
Okay.
the line of David.
Very
and
cool.
fulfilling the prophecy.